is Jack. Jack is happy. Jack is happy because he's in his comfort zone. Go, Jack, go. Jack is a good driver. However, he has been stopped for DUI, driving underinflated. Jack loves to go to church. Go to church, Jack, go! Jack used to enjoy visiting with friends over a good meal at church. However, he stopped going to meals at church because meeting new people is out of Jack's comfort zone. Jack used to volunteer in the children's ministry. However, he stopped that because children are outside of his comfort zone. Oh, look at them giggle. That's gonna make Jack cry. Jack tried attending a small group one time. However, the leader said, "Jack, why don't you share with us?" And that, you guessed it, was outside of his comfort zone. Jack has many dreams, desires, and ambitions. He wants his life to count for something. However, that will never happen because life lived inside the comfort zone is life lived outside of God's will.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Celebration. Maybe you can relate to Jack there. No, I certainly could years ago, but I'm really glad you're here. I'm Roger. If you don't know me, Roger Morrell, one of the pastors and staff members here at Celebration. And like I said, I'm glad we're here, and we're going to be continuing to talk about this whole unity and community series that Robert's been talking about. And, you know, for the broad sense of it, he's been talking about how from the very beginning, God created us for community. He created us to be together. He did not design us to be alone. He created man and woman, and then that branched out into whole society, and and then we get into getting out of our comfort zone. And so, see, where I'm going with that today is for the past 6 weeks, as you've been hearing us as a church say that we needed community group coordinators. We've been pushing to get signs for that. We've been telling you, reinforcing. We're really going into this 8-week series. And in the past 2 or 3 weeks, it's been like sign up for these groups. And, when I first started coming to Celebration here I don't know, 8, 10 years ago, getting in community groups really just kind of got me way out of my comfort zone. And for everybody that didn't get you out of your comfort zone, you're like, oh yeah, new groups. It was like, what is wrong with you? Because that was not my personality. I did not want to be in community groups. I was a real loner. But as we're going to see through this teaching, God can really change our lives and get us out of our comfort zone. And so, what gets you out of your comfort zone? And so, just that tension of this week starting, that we're going to be starting these community groups, meeting on Wednesday night and whatever the night of the group, night of the week that your group may be meeting. I just felt like maybe some of you were having that tension and getting out of that comfort zone. And so, when Robert asked me to speak this weekend, it's not something I normally do, but I thought in just conjunction and being on board with the whole idea of asking you guys to get out of your comfort zone, I agreed to speak because this is way out of my comfort zone. This is not the thing I'd like to do, speaking to all this group of people here. And so I am way out of my comfort zone, and so I am right there with you as we go into this whole starting community group series and kickoff. But God's community, what I want us to see through this teaching, I want to kind of give you some encouragement. I want to try to give you maybe a few challenges to think about and maybe some new information that you hadn't thought about with regards to community group, that actually all of us as human beings, if we really look at it and see the view, God's view of the whole community, I think that we'll see that there's a thread of us that just realizes that we need to be in community, and it was created from God in the beginning. And I put here here the world, but really you could have said the universe, because we know in the beginning God created the whole universe and he created the world. And then you begin to see this whole funnel dynamic thing about how things begin to they go from very large universe down to earth. And then, Jesus came to the world. We know that. And you could say the world, you could say countries, you could say United States, you could say states, you could say regions, could say all those different things. But it begins to narrow down, to where we go from this great big thing that we keep having this community down to these smaller things. And when Jesus came, he taught the multitudes. You're familiar that everywhere he went, people gathered in multitudes just to hear him teach and came to be healed and demons cast out and all those things. And with regard to our world, we could say congregation, because we all gather here together. It's kind of similar. We go out. We know we live in the state of Tennessee, Virginia, whatever. But then we come together in a smaller community here at Celebration at 3 different services. And then when we all get together in one big place, it's just a whole bunch of people. But then you could build the case from Jesus. He just began to continue to show this idea of getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Then he went from the multitudes to the 12. And you see, like here in Mark's account of the gospel in chapter 3, verse 13, it said, Jesus went up on a mountainside and he called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. So he asked people to come together and be part of this, and they agreed to come. And then he appointed 12, it says, designated them as apostles, that they might be with him, what I'm saying, community, and that he might send them out to preach and have authority to drive out demons. And so, he asked them to be part of this. They agreed to come and be with him. And can you imagine being part of Jesus' community group, if you want to call that, for 3 years? Can you just imagine what that would be like? The 12 of them walking around for 3 years. And so then you could even, I think, build it down and drill down even farther to what I would call the 4 here, because on multiple occasions, and this is one that Matthew, which he was one of the 12 that was called, in chapter 17 and verse 1, and this happened often, that these 4 together here. It says, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and he led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And so you may remember this particular instance where they went up on the mountain and they were able to see what was called the transfiguration of Jesus, where they really saw just the grand splendor of who Jesus really is and what he really looked like. And there were other occasions when he took them with him, just these 3, and it was the 4 of them that went and they did healing, like of Jairus' daughter, in a lot of different cases. But you can see that, even though Jesus knew everything already because he was fully God and fully man, but he was able to go a little bit deeper with these particular 3, and these 3 probably were able to see a little more insight into who Jesus was, just because he made that crowd just a little bit smaller. And then I think you could build the case for just me and God, or you could say the 2, and you can do, one of the examples would be like John. John, he was one of the 12 as well, and he wrote one of the Gospels, the good news, the account of Jesus. And he said here, and he said this also, he said this on multiple occasions if you read through his account. He said one of them, and he's talking about himself, he said one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. And formerly when I would read this scripture a lot, and I would think, he's talking about himself. Is that arrogance or what is that? But, if you really read through John's account and you read just the intensity of how you could see that, how much love Jesus has for people around the world, in community, in multitudes, in the 12, in the 4. John continuously built that case, and then you could just see how much Jesus loved John. You could see how much John loved Jesus. And so he really wanted to highlight that this is a one-on-one thing. It could just be me and God. And so see, the thing is getting out of our comfort zone. We could live right here with this whole me and God thing, because, who's going to really call you out and say, well, you're not really in communion with God? That's a personal thing, so it's not necessarily out of our comfort zone. And we could hide behind that whole thing and not be out of our comfort zone, just me and God. I can stay home, worship God. He's everywhere, and wherever I go. And the whole world thing, very seldom do we get out of our comfort zone there, but once in a while we bump up against it. I'm going to Brazil in October to visit a group of people that I've been there multiple times over the past 5 or 6 years, and that gets me out of my comfort zone a little bit, traveling by myself, to a place where I don't know their language, and hoping in the airport that it's not just in Portuguese, and it's not all just blah, 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 and all these different things, and hoping that they have the, itineraries in English, and if not, somebody there speaks English. But see, we don't touch on that whole getting out of our comfort zone very often. But then, and in the multitudes, or congregation, as we may said, we all come together here, and that's not really so much out of our comfort zone, but, it really proves my point, and I started to do this, just to kind of let people feel the tension. I started to say, okay, we're talking about getting out of our comfort zone, so you guys in the back, y'all come to the front, the ones in the back, y'all go, the ones in the front, y'all go to the back, and everybody just scoot to the middle where you're right up against each other. And you can just imagine the tension you'd feel, and there'd be some of those people would be like, I'm not doing that, I'm staying right where I'm at. But, it kind of proves the point if you look around the room. I mean, you come in and you know some people and you sit with them, but some people are like, there's 4 rows between you, there's 3 rows between you, I've got four there and 2 here, and we just really prove the point that even in the multitude, the congregation, there's a certain amount of that tension going on. And so then the real deal comes is like the 12 and the 4. And that's where the tension comes in, because, if it's like, okay, I'm going to be in a group of 12 people, and you show up in that, you're not going to be in a row, right? It's like, okay, there's the chairs are all lined up. It's not going to be like that. If they're just 12 people, you're going to be probably where you're seeing people face to face. See, this whole congregation thing, that's a little more safe, because what? I mean, you're looking at the back of somebody's head. I mean, what kind of, community is that? You're dissecting what their whole hairdo looks like, and I wish their head wasn't so big, and maybe I should scoot over. But, I mean, you're looking at the back of people's head, and, you got several people between you there, or several chairs, and you're like, I hope they don't look over here, I don't want to look over there. And so, that's not really community. But if you get into this whole 12 thing, and you're going to be in a circle, and heaven forbid, we get in 4, it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? I used to, when I was so bashful, and even though this is out of my comfort zone, when I was learning to play golf, and it's like, oh man, I'm going to be playing golf with a foursome, and I don't know any of these 3 people, and I know I stink at it. And so, that you just know, and I'm stuck in a golf cart for 4 hours with somebody I don't know. And there's all that tension that comes here. And why is that? Has it always been that way? Or, we remember people talking about, oh, we used to get together all the time in our home and everybody knew everything about everybody. But see, I think that there's been a progressive decline in community and relationships. And I just think that over time there has been. And so has it always been that way, or is it just in today's society? And see, probably at some point, like when the early church started, you remember if you've read Acts, it's like they were all together, everybody shared, everybody was there. It said they were in one accord or in unity, and you just kind of knew that people were giving stuff and helping each other. And so it probably wasn't that way in the church community when it first began, but over time, it drifted away. And so we may feel that today, and you may agree with me, but what's interesting is in Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews, and we don't know who that was, but he says there in chapter 10, verse 24, and he begins to talk about this kind of thing. Because he's building the whole idea that, Jesus is supreme, he's the greatest, there's nobody bigger than him, and he spends a lot of time encouraging the people, and he comes in verse 24, and he says this, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. And then he goes on, he says, let us not give up meeting together, and check this out, thousands of years ago, as some are in the habit of doing. And see, this was probably the second generation of, Jesus followers, a lot of that they had learned from their parents. And so people had begun to be in the habit of not meeting together. And so this will be kind of the verse where we camp out here for the rest of the time. And then he goes on, he says, let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And so, and this whole thing here, let us encourage one another, this was the second time that he said this. If you go back and read the book of Hebrews in chapter 3, he said the same thing. He said, let us encourage one another, but he added something. He said, daily. In other words, not when you get back together on Saturday night or Sunday morning or whenever your church group meets, but let us encourage one another, which meant that daily connectedness where we're being more connected as community. And so then we didn't want to give up meeting together as some were in the habit of doing even thousands of years ago. And I think that's kind of where we're at, and why here at Celebration we're wanting to reconnect and get people more inspired to do that. Now, I want to tell you this thing about this guy, Johann Hari, and it's from his book, Chasing the Scream. It's a, very interesting book, but, I'm pretty sure he's not a Christian, but he had this interesting idea with this decline in community and relationships and all. And he wrote this article, and there's also a YouTube video about it called "Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong." And I'm not changing the whole dynamic to talk about addiction, but I want to show you two different areas, like from the addictive community, for instance, and then maybe from the Christian community, and show you how this is a universal theme about how community has an effect on changing our lives, no matter what your belief system may have been. But he said, everything you know about addiction is wrong. And look at what he says here. He says, since the 1950s, the average number of close friends in America has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in our homes has been increasing. He said to choose floor space over friends and to choose stuff over connection. And think about it. If you drive around the Tri-Cities and you see, at least me, all these huge houses being built, and you're thinking, who in the world lives in these houses? And you're thinking they must have 10 or 20 kids. And, you meet them and you're like, oh, there's just 4 of us. And so what he's saying is true, floor space in our homes has been steadily increasing, but, relationship has been decreasing. I know people, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or whatever, but there's only 3 or 4 in the house, and everybody has their own bedroom. They're way over there. They're way over there. Everybody has a TV, electronic devices, Xbox, PlayStation, whatever in their bedroom. And then you cross paths of a morning, okay, see you later, see you at the ball game, see you at cheerleading practice, or whatever it is you do. But I think he nailed it there. He said that we choose floor space over friends, and we choose stuff over connection. And he goes on to say, we're going to have to change the unnatural way that we live and rediscover each other. And as far as he was talking about, the whole war on drugs thing is what this whole book was about, where all the drugs were declared illegal because, there's such an addictive nature to them. And he goes on to say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but the opposite of addiction is connection. And he gave several examples in there that were fascinating examples. Maybe you've heard that whole experiment where they put a rat in a cage and it had 2 bottles, one with water, one laced with heroin and cocaine, and then the rat would just drink from the cocaine bottle and drink itself to death. And so what he did is he's like, there's bound to be something different. And that proved that stuff was so addictive you couldn't stop. So he built this other cage called Rat Park. And he put a whole bunch of rats in there, and he put colorful balls, tubes, wheels, all the different things you had, and he put the same bottles. And hardly ever did any of the rats go to the bottles laced with heroin or cocaine. And so then you think, well, it's just rats. But then he talked about 2 human experiments. He talked like grandma, when she goes to the hospital to have a hip replacement, and they put her on a stronger dose of morphine or heroin, purest form you could ever find, that you could ever find on the street. And they do that for pain to get her through this hip replacement, and she goes to home. And does she stay addicted because the addictive nature of that chemical? No, she goes back into this loving environment, she finishes her meds, and she's done. And so then you think, okay, well, that's one thing. And so then he talked about, soldiers from the Vietnam War. And while they were over there in the jungles, it was like being in a cage. And the only thing they did was shoot up heroin, every day and every night. And there was this fear that when they returned from Vietnam, that there would be this huge epidemic, people going into rehab, families busted apart, and all these other things. But for the majority of the soldiers that came home and they reunited with their loving family, connection, then it never was an issue. There wasn't rehab issues. Of course, there was PTSD and all this other kind of stuff. But as far as the addiction, it wasn't the drug. It was the connection that got them off of it. And his point is that everybody bonds with something. And you're either going to bond with things, cell phones or whatever, or drugs or all these different things, or you're going to bond with proper people. And so the opposite of addiction is connection. And I've learned that to be absolutely true. And so then there was this other guy, John Lynch. You could Google this as well. He was speaking to a group of graduating students at Biola University, which is a Christian university, and he began to talk to them about this whole idea of inauthentic religion that they had probably seen in their parents, where nobody was connected. They lived their life in a bubble and all these different things. And he was telling them, because they'd been doing all this studying for years in school, he said, you want to become godly and then go out and live it. In other words, I want to study everything I can study, do everything I can do, and then go out and live the godly life. And he says, it doesn't work that way. And he goes on to say that everyone is hurting. This is like where we live around. Everyone is hurting, and no one will tell each other. It's like we're a generation with broccoli in their teeth, and no one can tell them. It's like we're so scattered out, nobody's going to say anything. I see it, but I'm not going to say anything about it. And I'm not going to tell you that. And so we become hidden and we start putting on a mask because we want to be loved and we don't want to be felt sorry for. The only problem with mask is when you wear a mask, only the mask gets loved. I never get loved. And see, I lived this because I would wear a mask whether I was in a friendship relationship, a group relationship, or whatever, that I would wear these masks, and I wasn't even aware of this principle, but I see myself doing this. And I would play the part that I perceived the person wanted me to be, and I would know that they loved me, I'd know they care about me, and I would feel like that it was really genuine. But when I would walk away, I would still have this emptiness, like there was still something missing from that connection I had with this person. And what really was going on is they were only loving the mask because that's all I was allowing them to see. I never got loved because they never were able to see who I really was until I took that mask off. He goes on to say, and this, you might want to write this down. This is powerful. Character is formed in relationships and tested in isolation. Think about that. Character is formed in relationships and tested in isolation. You will not mature in isolation. In other words, how do I find out about love until I discover someone that's not easy to love? Or you could take another example. I mean, you go through marriage counseling, you read all the books, you watch all the DVDs, you do all these different things, and then you get married and you say, what? You sure couldn't learn that from the DVD. This sure was not in the book. Or you're getting ready to have your first child, you do all that training, you go to all those classes, and then the baby comes, and, into it, you're like, they sure didn't teach you this, in those classes. Or, you studied real hard for this job, you went through all this education, you got geared up to do this job, and, when I was in construction, I used to train these guys. I was project manager, and we would get these kids from ETSU that had graduated the construction technology class, and I would bring them in and take them out into the field and show them what we did as project managers and superintendents and all those things. And you would often see them say, they didn't teach you that in school. And so, character is formed in relationships. It's tested in isolation. We can't learn all this stuff by ourselves. We will not mature in isolation. And he goes on to say, the humility that it takes to open ourselves up, and here's his definition: humility is those who have learned to trust some others and God with themselves. Can you see how big that is? Humility is those who have learned to trust some others and God with themselves. In other words, we're getting out of our bubble, we're getting outside of our comfort zone and beginning to realize that I have to learn to trust God first, which is hard if we've had trust issues, and trust some others with ourselves. And so then you think about, okay, the mixture. What is this whole community group going to look like? All this tension that I have maybe of joining this community group, I don't know who these people are going to be. Well, what's interesting is we have this example with the 12 disciples. I mean, they had their own little 12 group there. And it's the same today. I mean, you're going to have family members there. Andrew and Peter, they were brothers. James and John, they were brothers. So you're going to have some people there that's family, and that's okay. And then you're going to have the know-it-alls. You remember Peter, Jesus was like, I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to be beaten, and I'm going to die. And Peter's like, no, you're not. And God was like, Jesus, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Get behind me, Satan. And then also, he was like the overachiever. It's like, Jesus was saying, you're going to abandon me and I'm going to be by myself. And Peter's like, oh, no, we're not. We're going with you to the end of the earth. You're going to have the overachievers in the group. And then you're going to have the quiet ones. I mean, what about some of the other 12? I mean, we read a lot about these characters here that we're talking about. But, what about Philip? What about Thaddeus? What about Andrew? I mean, when do you ever hear more about them? You're going to have the people in the group that are the quiet ones. And see, it's the same kind of mixture we're going to have. Then you're going to have the doubters. Thomas is like, I don't know, is it really, really true? Maybe, maybe not. You'll have the doubters in the group. And then you're going to have the outsiders. Matthew, he was one of them. He had his own classification, not just a sinner, but he was a tax collector. You know what I mean? Nobody likes tax collectors. They hated tax collectors. I mean, they were the outsiders. And so, our outsiders may be somebody that's been addicted. It may be somebody that's just got a whole different belief system. It may be somebody that's just weird. It's like, why are they here? I don't even know. But you're going to have outsiders in your group. And then some will leave. Judas. For 3 years, they ran around together, but, obviously he had something else going on, and it was like, Didn't see that coming, you know? I mean, what happened there? I mean, you get established in these community groups, and then sometimes people just walk away, and you're like, I didn't see that coming. And so I guess you could call it wearing a mask, not even being real. And so remember what the writer of Hebrews says, let's spur one another on, not give up meeting together, and encourage one another. And I would challenge you here, you know, I got these words highlighted, spur on, meeting, and encourage. But look at this. I mean, this is not individual. This is the one another. Together, one another. We're one another, and we're horizontally learning to be in circles instead of rows. And so I wanted to share a little bit with you just from my experience, because, you know, if you've had that tension of going into a community group, and I don't know what that's looked like, but, you know, what worked for me, I get questions all the time, people calling me and saying, how did you get through that twisted past? How did you get past all that stuff that you were involved in? And as I was thinking about this, you know, I came up with a few bullet points, but the thing is, and it wasn't just because it's this weekend, but it came to me just yesterday. I mean, how did I really get through all my stuff? And it was God in groups. And I mean, that's not just because I'm talking about groups today, but as I thought about it, I thought it was God and groups. That's what got me better. That's what got me to the place I am today, and I still have a long way to go, but it was God and groups. But the first place I was at was fear. I mean, I was operating in I'm okay alone. I'm fully self-sufficient. And I was a Christian, you know, and being fully and I would say this out loud. I mean, you know, what is the main thing Jesus talks about? Deny yourself. And I was building myself up, you know, I don't need anybody. I'm fully self-sufficient. You could say it was the whole me and God thing like we talked about. And so then there was the whole church thing, the congregation that I came into. And I'm in my congregation, but it was kind of like he talked about the mask. I can be as lonely in a crowd as when I'm alone. I mean, I would come in here and look at the back of people's head and, you know, sneak in and sneak out. And I was fine with that because, you know, I mean, I'm up here talking, we're here in congregation, but you don't really know me. I mean, we're not really connected. I mean, we learn from the speakers that come up here and talk on stage, and this is a certain amount of community, but that's it. I mean, we see each other, you know, and hi, see you later, how's the weather, you know, just see the football game and all that kind of stuff. And we can be as lonely as a crowd as when I'm alone. And then I joined community groups. And let me just say this here, because my upbringing was, I don't know, maybe it was different from you, but for me, I was introduced, I mean, the whole God thing that brings us into these community groups, the way God designed us to be, church was not where I learned about community groups. I learned about community groups through recovery. You know, and you know, because, you know, you had to get in groups, you had to get in circles, you had to learn to talk about yourself. And, you know, the authors of, you know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I mean, they talk about you have to connect to a higher power who they call the creator of the universe, and I believe that is God and Jesus. But I mean, they nailed it through that. They call themselves a fellowship of people because you have to stay connected. Just like Johann Hari was talking about. I mean, it's what you bond with. It has to be connection, not just sobriety. But that's where I was introduced to community groups. But then here at Celebration, I got introduced to them in a real form, and it was still at first, I'm here, but I'm not really here. I was still isolating, still wearing the mask. But then eventually it became a life experience, and groups became my very life, and I'm all in. And it's just fascinating that we grow up in, you know, a lot of us had dysfunctional families, and the way God has wired us and wired society, I mean, where there are lapses in family, where there are lapses in, I got a dysfunctional parent, brother, sister, aunt, and uncle, or whatever, I mean, God will place people in our life that become the family of God, the community of God, that can be our spiritual parents, our spiritual brother, sister, and it's just like a whole new family that he can put in place to make up for all the different deficiencies in society. And so then it becomes contagious. And, you know, in my experience, you know, we started Celebrate Recovery. And again, my experience is not going to be your experience. Your experience is not going to be somebody else's experience. And so don't have any tension about that. But the contagious part will be the same experience. I promise you this. And so we started Celebrate Recovery. We started celebrating freedom. We began the Branch House, which the whole idea of Branch House is putting people together, getting them to learn, just like Rat Park, that, you know, you're going to bond with something, and we want you to bond with healthy people, and first of all with God, and that's what's going to get you on the right place. And so then we changed to the Hub here recently, and we call it a gathering place for all of us, and we give it this whole idea of it's a place where we meet, where we put people in circles instead of rows, with the idea of learning how to keep Jesus at the center of our entire life. And it's what we do. I mean, we put people in circles so that you can look at each other and you can talk about things and keep that whole idea going. And so, what's in it for me? And if you didn't hear anything else, I want you to pay attention to this because, step outside of your comfort zone. What's in it for me? Here's what I promise you. You will gain encouragement from just being in a community group with others. I promise you. You will gain encouragement from just being in a community group with others, and others will gain encouragement from just being in a community group with you. And if the tension is still there, look, sometimes the only thing required of you is your presence. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, sometimes the only thing required of you is just your presence. And if I could say one thing, look, just to men, because I'm a man, and I know what this feels like. And you're thinking, get me out of here. I'm not doing that. Men don't talk to each other. But look, think about it. Just ask God, if you can just do this, just your presence, I can promise you that others will gain encouragement from you being there, that you will gain encouragement from being there. I promise you that what will happen if you just show up, you're going to hear somebody say something, and it may be 2 or 3 weeks, and it's going to be like, you know what, I can relate. Or let me just tell you this, I've been through what you're talking about. And so, men, this is so hard for us to do, but I challenge you just to go along and do this. And so moving forward, can you see how meeting together, the whole Hebrews thing, can you see how meeting together can help? It can change our life, spur one another on. Encouragement for each other. That's where it will take us. Just be there, just your presence. And so I want us to watch this short video. Maybe you've seen it. If you have, don't check out for everybody else's sake, and then we'll wrap this thing up really quick here. Let's watch this together.
Hi, I'm Robert. If you happen to be new to Celebration Church, I'm Robert Russell. I serve as the lead pastor at Celebration. And no, I don't spend all of my time out fishing, but it is a great way to get out and relax and relieve stress. And the thing that I've really come to love most about fishing is spending time with great people. And the great part about that is really developing fellowship and a sense of community with a lot of different people and community with people who love to fish. Certainly in my personal Christian life, community, that is relationships with other people, has been critical from time to time. There's nobody who can journey through this life alone and really handle all the challenges of life without support from other people. But for many people, it's new to them. Maybe there's a little fear, a little uncertainty about community. But we're encouraging everybody to take a little risk, to step out and become involved in a community group this season.
We hadn't been going to the church for very long, and we're looking to get more involved, and ran into some friends of ours that we'd known from college but hadn't really seen since then, and they invited us to come along, join in with their small group.
I was just looking for some way to get involved at church, and I had heard about this particular small group, and I went, and I loved it.
And we all just really hit it off immediately. We became best friends right away.
Being surrounded with other people that are looking for the same thing I'm desiring is really motivating to stay in the group, and it compels me to dig deeper with these people to find what we're all looking for.
These are who I call now. If I need help or there's a problem or something great happens, that's who I call. They're my best friends.
For me, being a part of a community group, I found a place of trust, a place where I can, tear down walls and open up about, things that I've been going through, and the things in my past.
If you think about it, you'll find the concept of community throughout Scripture. Going all the way back to the book of Genesis, God created Adam, and then he said it's not good for man to be alone. So he created Eve, then gave them children. From there, the whole human race developed, and the concept of community really expanded exponentially. Now, I think what God was doing was trying to reveal to us something about his own nature. That is, he desires relationship with us, And we learn about relationship with Him through relationships with other people. And in the New Testament, certainly Jesus emphasized the idea of community. He selected the 12 disciples, had them grow and learn under His teaching, but then He did so for other reasons. One is that they would later support each other, because Christ knew what they did not know. He was going to send them on a mission and a journey that was very profound and very challenging. And they were going to need each other's support. Wherever they went, it was a good idea for the disciples to be in groups and supporting one another. In fact, they would plant churches, and there they would raise up an elder, and again, they would be in a place of community where they would have support from one another.
I can understand people beginning to feel like they don't belong. I've had those feelings myself. But I know that the way that I can have a place is to make a place for me.
Isolation is one of the most damaging things that you can do as far as going through tragedies, going through hard times. We have this innate desire through our Creator to bond with people.
I can bring lots of problems to this group and feel safe and comfortable to talk about them, whether they be about family or work or anything in between.
Even upon attending my first, I kind of looked around thinking, I'm not sure I have a whole lot in common with these ladies. And by the end of the study, the connection, the sisterhood that has been created between us is lifelong.
I'm standing literally right now on top of a retaining wall that I helped, someone else in our peer group build. It's been a great opportunity to, come closer, to get to serve, but then you also get the spiritual side. You get to go in depth with these studies. You get to stay accountable. You get to talk more in depth.
We're here to help each other. I believe that's why God has us at all ages, is because we can share in each other's lives and be able to connect in that way. It's just amazing.
I've kind of grown a lot in the last year with Ruach, mostly because I felt like I was cared for by most of the people in the group.
I always held myself back by what ifs and fear of doing something wrong. And this small group has definitely showed me that I can do so much more without being scared.
Well, one of the things we want to do this fall is really encourage everybody to be involved in a community group and really to learn and to grow together during that time period. We don't put a lot of pressure on people to do things at Celebration, but this one time around, we're asking you, will you personally commit to be a part of a community group during September and October of this year? I think you'll benefit. I know the church will benefit. And together, we will all grow in terms of our relationships with each other and our relationship with Christ.
Definitely will see an improvement in your life on a daily basis.
I'm so glad I didn't let fear prevent me from joining a small group. I now have lifelong friends, a great group of prayer warriors, and for that, I'm so thankful.
It really comforted me to find that I could grow throughout this time with the help of a lot of people in our small group.
I definitely think being in a small group can change your life.
That's where we're going to be going next 8 weeks. We're challenging every one of you to get out of your comfort zone, all of us to join a group. There's sign-up sheets in the back, and it's my prayer that you will take advantage of that. If you don't find one you're looking for back there, don't tell the church office I said this, but call them and badger them. Say, look, I don't see what I need. I need something else. Call them. Or get in a group somewhere. It will change your life. I promise you it will change your life. Just a few announcements. Here it is.